when I went into the Design Futures program, I had just finished an internship at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. I wanted to design museum exhibits and really create a three-dimensional space that people can learn and interact with and walk away feeling like, okay, I have new information or I have a new perspective. I realized the Oregon Desert Trail, is my museum exhibit. And I'm facilitating someone's experience through a three-dimensional space, which is Southeastern Oregon. But what's unique about this trail is it's created by a conservation organization, and they wanted to create a long-distance hiking route to help the recreation community understand the environmental issues that are happening in Southeastern Oregon and join them in their efforts to protect or steward them. So I'm creating a more informed and active hiker when they are hiking the Oregon Desert Trail.
Hey folks, thanks so much for tuning in to the latest episode of the Ecosystem Member Podcast. Today's guest is Renee Patrick, a thru hiker, long-distance trail consultant, and an environmentalist. Renee is awesome for two specific reasons. One, she's hiked some incredible long-distance treks, including the Triple Crown in the U.S., that's the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail. And two, she actually designs trails. Yes, Renee designs trails and how people experience them. I am sure many of you are sort of like me and just assume trails appear as people walk repeatedly along the same path, and then some very nice folks come along and help maintain them, and somebody maps them, or maybe at the very least you just didn't really know exactly how your favorite trails got there. But Renee is one of those people who actually helps bring them to life in an intentional way. So make sure to check out the episode and then check out Renee on Instagram at WeAreHikerTrash to follow her amazing adventures and to see her latest projects. She also hosts a forum called Intentional Hiking that we talk about in the episode that is well worth your time to check out. As a reminder, if you like this or any of our Ecosystem Member episodes, please share them. As you've probably noticed, we don't have ads on the podcast, and this project is entirely self-funded. So by sharing this episode, you effectively become the advertising that we don't really have the budget for. It is really, really appreciated, and I get a smile every single time I see someone share an episode. So without further delay, here's the latest episode of the Ecosystem Member Podcast with Renee Patrick. Today on the Ecosystem Member Podcast, we are really excited to have Renee Patrick, thru hiker, long-distance trail consultant, and environmentalist. Thanks for joining us today, Renee.
I'm excited to be here, Rick. Thanks for having me.
I was looking at the homepage of your website, and there's a really awesome quote: "When we see ourselves as part of nature, we act differently." We always ask our guests the same first question: how do you define and think about your relationship with nature?
Feeling like I'm part of nature has been really important in all of my life. Even from a young child, I grew up in Wisconsin, running around, building tree houses and forts in the cornfields, and just felt like the outdoors was an extension of my home. Like this was something very comfortable that I had a relationship with. And so defining that relationship, I think it comes down to respect, and it's a nurturing relationship. So when I'm backpacking, I spend most of my time solo. So I'm out for weeks, months, many months at a time by myself in nature. And I know I need to respect the environment and my surroundings when I'm out there, especially by myself, and I need to make good decisions. But I find that I feel nurtured by nature when I'm out there. So I've had moments when I've been struggling up the trail. It's just been a really tough day. And then suddenly the sunlight comes out and I feel like I'm basking in this warmth and sort of consoling, like it's okay. Or maybe I'll get to a beautiful view. And then for myself, I express my gratitude out loud. It does feel reciprocal when I'm out there. And maybe that's because I spend so much time solo that I do feel like I have this more intimate relationship with the places that I'm literally living outside for months at a time. But the other side of that respect is respecting that nature isn't always going to coddle me. I need to show up with the right gear, having good decisions, being able to look at the situation, whether it's snowing or raining or whatever, make sure I can keep myself warm and dry. Can I carry enough water and food to meet my needs? Can I read the clues that nature is giving me? So it feels like a wonderful give and take relationship with the world.
I love that idea of respect and it being a reciprocal relationship. And I'm really curious to dive into the through hiking. Your engagement here is quite deep. I think deeper than a lot of people. I am fine with just a night or two in a tent and then returning to my bed at the end of a trip. So, for those who aren't familiar with through hiking and long distance trails, can you explain what it is, what defines a through hike versus a regular hike, like how you actually prepare, what goes into preparing for a multi-month big hike?
Right. So a through hike in its most simplest term is hiking a trail from the start to the finish. And so there are plenty of short trails out there, 5, 10 miles. But I think what gets it into long distance trails when you're spending multiple days in a row. For someone that might be a 30-mile trail could take 3 to 4 days. There's other hikers who hike 30 miles in a day. I think my longest mileage day ever was a 40, and I hope to never do that again. So it depends on the length of the trail. So the big three national scenic trails in the United States, that's called the Triple Crown, which I've hiked, are the Appalachian Trail, the Pacific Crest Trail, and the Continental Divide Trail. Those are all over 2,000 miles long. So to do a hike like that, when I did them, they all took me at least 5 months, sometimes almost 5.5 months. So you're literally living outside for half a year. For the planning something like that, it's hard. It's hard to prepare your body to walk 2,000 miles. And sometimes the best way to do it is to just get out there and hike, and just hike all day, every day, day after day. There's lots of considerations around gear and getting the knowledge to make good decisions. Do you know where to sleep that would protect you from wind and potential trees if you're in a burned area? Or there's lots of considerations, but there's a ton of guidance out there for people who are interested in going out on these longer hikes.
The way you described your relationship with nature is really interesting. And some of these longer treks that you've done, talking about the Triple Crown and 2000 plus mile trails, for those of us who might not have ever extended ourselves that much, what does your motivation look like? Is that relationship with nature part of it? Like, what are you thinking about when you decide to try to tackle one of these really long distance excursions?
Well, I think what I find most attractive, and a lot of other hikers I've talked to, is the freedom of it. Knowing that you have months to walk, you're walking, and with everything you need on your back. So the simplicity of it, the freedom of it, you're heading out. And sometimes it takes a couple weeks to shake off modern life, to, get over the fact that you're not in the four walls and you don't have hot water on demand, and that you don't have internet all the time, and all these obligations of a job, and it takes a while to shed that and to be truly present in the moment and aware and engage with what's around you. But once you get past that detox, if you will, that detox of modern life, and then your body is getting stronger, sometimes it takes like 3 weeks, I think, is the magic spot where you turn into a hiking machine. And I don't like to focus on the full like 2,000 miles. I focus on the day, on the step. And I actually have this mantra that I've used on a lot of trails when it's a particularly really tough section of trail. For example, on the Continental Divide Trail, there was a lot of snow when I was in the high country in Colorado. And sometimes there were icy, very exposed slopes. And I just had to slow down and say one step at a time. All I could focus on was the next step, because if I let my mind go and focus on 10 steps or that scary part up ahead, I would lose focus and not do what I needed to do in that moment. So I think it helps you stay present. It's very simple. It's very freeing. Just the whole experience is very addictive. And so myself and other hikers keep going back and want to hike a trail after trail, because it's hard to replicate that feeling off trail of everything that I've explained. So we keep going, and we're addicted through hikers.
What you talked about, that 3 weeks being a key moment. Like, what what have you learned? What has sort of maybe surprised you as you've started to develop more and more engagement with trails through these extended periods of times? What have you learned? What has really surprised you that might be helpful maybe in persuading someone else to give it a shot and break down some of those initial barriers that they might have about tackling something like this?
Well, I'm really testing my own limits. So on the first trail that I hiked, the Appalachian Trail in 2002, I had never backpacked before. It was really an experiment. And, I think this is a good idea. I don't know if I'm going to like it. But I remember the first day that I hiked 14 miles, and I just felt so incredibly empowered and confident and excited that my body could do this. And like I said, I've gone on to hike longer and longer days, up to 40 miles. And it's just, you're continually sort of challenging your own assumptions about what's possible. And I think that's really exciting. And my skills have developed over the years. When I hiked the Pacific Crest Trail, that was in 2006, I didn't know much about snow travel or about navigation, but through more and more trails, I gained the skills, I gained the confidence. And now some of my favorite trips are hiking without trail, just navigating in the backcountry. And that's even the next step in freedom, because I can look at a map, a topography map, understand what those lines mean, and translate that into the world around me and go explore, because I say that feature looks interesting, or I want to see what's around that corner. And so now I have the confidence and the skills to hike without trail. And that's really exciting.
That's awesome. The idea of gaining confidence is really compelling, especially for people who are looking to explore that relationship with nature more deeply. So, in addition to gaining confidence, from what I understand, when you do some of these longer trips, like the Appalachian Trail, you also gain a trail name. Can you talk a little bit about your trail name and kind of how the trail name system works?
So trail names are a fun part of the long distance hiking culture. When you're out there, there might be hundreds or thousands of other hikers, and you might run into like 25 Bobs and 10 Sarahs. And so taking a trail name, a unique name, is a way to differentiate yourself. And we're our own little subculture. So when I started the Appalachian Trail, I hiked that one with a friend of mine. And as I said, neither of us had really backpacked before. We didn't quite know what we were doing. So our packs were huge and heavy. And the first couple of days were rainy and cold. So we were struggling. But by the third day, we climbed this mountain called Blood Mountain. And it was sunny and beautiful. And I was feeling strong. And so I'm also a child of the 80s. So I grew up watching the cartoons He-Man and She-Ra. So this was a sister and brother. They were each masters of their own universes, and it's kind of like superheroes. So I was feeling good at the top of the mountain. I took my hiking pole and I thrust it into the air and I said, I have the power. And so my friend said, oh, you have to take the trail name She-Ra. So I did take that name and have continued to use it on all my hiking trails ever since. But you have fun with it. So when I was on the Pacific Crest Trail, my friend and I were in Ashland, Oregon, and went to a Shakespeare play because they have an annual Shakespeare festival. And someone was selling plastic swords. So she bought me a sword, knighted me on the streets of Ashland, and I carried that sword to Canada. It was really silly and funny. Like people would do double takes as I was hiking down the trail. Like, do you have a giant sword in your hip belt? And then on the Continental Divide Trail, I hiked that one solo. But when I got to Glacier National Park, I was about to reach Canada. She sent me another sword so I could hike to Canada once again with a sword. You just have a lot of fun. And trail names can be silly, serious, but a lot of us never know each other's real names. All we know are our trail names.
That's incredible. I really like that, these sort of things that make these different subcultures and, thinking about the diversity of an ecosystem, like just what that entails is really interesting. And I think from your perspective is also really interesting because you hike trails, but you also are involved in designing trails and you have a master's degree from a really well-regarded sort of internationally known program called Design Futures at Goldsmiths in London. So when you're thinking about like compiling or designing a trail, like and thinking about this idea of the Design Futures program, which is about designing for a better future. How do you think about designing trails for a better future, designing outdoor experiences for a better future when it comes to through hiking and trail design?
Yeah, this is a really interesting sort of progression. When I went into the Design Futures program, I had just finished an internship at the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. I wanted to design museum exhibits and really create a three-dimensional space that people can learn and interact with and walk away feeling like, okay, I have new information or I have a new perspective. And that was before I really went big on trails. And a few years later, after hiking more of these trails, I thought, I just want to live and work outside. And when I started working to develop the Oregon Desert Trail, which has been what I've been doing the last 8 years, I realized the Oregon Desert Trail, is my museum exhibit. And I'm facilitating someone's experience through a three-dimensional space, which is Southeastern Oregon. But what's unique about this trail is it's created by a conservation organization, and they wanted to create a long distance hiking route to help the recreation community understand the environmental issues that are happening in Southeastern Oregon and join them in their efforts to protect or steward them. And so I started embedding calls to action, information about animals like the sage grouse and the pronghorn, information about public lands and designations and who's managing our lands and for what. And so I realized all that I learned in Design Futures of creating a better world, I was trying to embed that. So I'm creating a more informed and active hiker when they are hiking the Oregon Desert Trail. And so I've been helping a new trail up in northeastern Oregon called the Blue Mountains Trail. And again, that's a conservation organization-led project. And we're trying to help the hikers really become informed and immersed in the issues that they're facing in that corner of Oregon. So I want to design a trail experience where we can become engaged and informed and take action on our homes because we live there. We spend so much time in these places.
I love that. That's really cool. So, with all these different trails that you've hiked, trails you've helped design, what does your dream trail look like? Do you have sections, the Appalachian Trail or the Pacific Crest or the Continental Divide or even some of these ones in Oregon that you're working on? Like, what does your dream trail look like? Like, what makes it up? Why would you choose those pieces? Like, what does it look like?
Well, ironically, I said that I hike solo a lot, and I do, and I love my personal time in nature. But something that I've come to love, I think, most or as much is the people that I meet on the trail. And so a dream trail would be friends that I've met, and some of the best friends that I have to this day I've met on long distance trails. So being with a few of those people in a very scenic, probably high alpine section. The PCT comes to mind because it's along the literal crest of the west coast of the mountains. Also, the Continental Divide, you have a lot of these sections. I love a trail when you can see miles where you're going on a ridge walk and you can look back and see where you've come from. You can see your progress. I love that kind of experience with people that I love and care about.
Awesome. I think so much more of what we remember from these experiences in nature. Like, yes, the places and the vistas and the views, but also the people we were with and the activities we were engaging in with them is all really important. You created a forum as part of your work called Intentional Hiking. When you think about intentional hiking, what does that look like? What is that trying to support? What sort of ideas is that trying to share?
I created intentional hiking as a way to work directly with the hiking community on some of these issues about being more engaged and thoughtful about our time outside. So with the trails, I'm trying to embed the materials and work with trail organizations. So hikers just have to learn. There's a huge desire among hikers themselves to take the initiative to be more intentional. And so what that looks like are things like gathering data that will inform science and research. When you're hiking, there's other aspects around being creative. So I'm excited to have someone on later this year who wrote a symphony after his Appalachian Trail hike. And so he was so moved by that experience, he wanted to create a symphony. There's other artists that I've had on, photographers, painters, and then there's aspects of learning. So I just had a botanist on the intentional hiking event to talk about the joy of plant identification and making the time when you're hiking to stop and use an app like iNaturalist to record sometimes endangered or endemic species that can inform science and research. So it's exploring lots of different ways we can plan. It does involve sometimes planning ahead of time. How am I going to be engaged on this trail? What do I want to do? How do I want to give back and help give folks maybe a little nudge or a little push to spend time thinking not just about their pack weight and what food they're going to carry, but also how are they going to participate, give back, and be a part of the systems that they're hiking through.
Yeah, iNaturalist is a great way to engage in citizen science and help contribute to that, but it's also another way to deepen engagement. So thank you so much, Renee, for joining us. It was really great to chat, and I'm excited to share this episode with our listeners.
Thank you, Rick. I love what you're doing with podcasts.